Well, let's get started. How about some introductions? As I mentioned, I'm Bob Carpenter. I'm the Director of Services for the STARLIMS practice here at CSols. I've been in the informatics space for over 16 years. Prior to that, 15 years in information technology. Doing a little bit of everything over those 15 years. Joining me today is Robert Lemire. He was our lead consultant on this project for many years, in fact. So I'm pleased that he could join us today, and he'll be available for any technical questions or clarifications that we might need as we go through. And as you can see, Robert's been around a long time as well, so we're happy to be here. And let's move on to the details. A little bit about CSols. So we are a North American consultancy focusing solely on informatics. We are services only. We have over 20 years of experience in the laboratory informatics space across multiple industries, primarily working in the pharmaceutical industry, regulated spaces. It's about 70% of what we do. And we're also happy and pleased to say that we've been a partner with STARLIMS since 2007, and we've worked on many projects across multiple industries, and we both share the same goals of customer satisfaction and success. So we're glad to be co-presenting today with STARLIMS. All right, so a little bit more about what the STARLIMS practice offers. Here's our services. You can see where we can start at the very beginning with your organization, as we sometimes do, all the way through the go live and transitions to support. And as part of this case study, we'll be discussing the aspects we did cover as part of our service offerings. And you can see there that that's all tied together with a methodology. And that methodology is, to no surprise, shared by GSK and also STARLIMS methodology. They're all aligned at a level. So we'll see that coming up soon. Tamara.
Thanks, Bob. Hi there. My name is Tamara McKenna. I'm a Senior Sales Executive and Strategic Accounts Manager with STARLIMS. I have been in this industry for approximately 21 years, actually starting my career as a process metallurgist, working for a mining research business, and moving into a LIMS role, specifically actually in professional services and in project management, before I moved into a commercial role about 17 years ago. My background is I have a degree in pure and process chemistry, and I've had a fair experience in terms of working with STARLIMS across a diverse range of industries, but most specifically in general manufacturing related to regulatory industries such as that which GSK finds themselves. Thanks, Bob. Next one. As a brief introduction to STARLIMS, we have been in the industry for more than 3 decades. The company was founded in the late 1980s with STARLIMS as the primary solution product, which is the primary solution across our entire informatics business range. We look at a combination of products that provide a STARLIMS as a centerpiece around LIMS, including scientific document management systems, electronic lab notebooks, lab execution systems, data analytics, mobile, and importantly in today's day and age, cloud solutions. Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thanks, Tamara. Let's move on to the case study itself. So one of the challenges, or one of the many challenges that GlaxoSmithKline faced, was they had the incumbent system was outdated and unsupported. The platform itself was unstable, creating production outages and also creating regulatory concerns. So there were significant challenges ahead for them as we embarked on this project with them. So with this project, the GSK embarked on a formal selection process to align the lab informatics products to address their needs. And that was substantiated by a detailed business plan and a process by which GSK selected STARLIMS as their LIMS product. And this was done to ensure that there was a repeatable and adaptable global solution. And that was GSK's solution to select STARLIMS. As you can see with the global map in the background there, the planned deployments were through Europe, South America, and Asia. So what was being addressed by virtue of this challenge? As I mentioned, scalable and repeatable. So that this solution needed to scale, and we needed to be able to deploy it, build it and deploy it in a repeatable fashion. A cookie cutter approach, if you will. But there were multiple items there they needed to address. Lab automation. They were moving away from paper-based lab processes and documentation over to electronic. There's a multi-language support was required based on the different geographies, regions, and countries. And by virtue of that, there was also the need for support for regulatory and reporting for those different locations. No surprise, validation was a major component of this. This was pharma and consumer health, so that was part of the solution required. Integrating instruments, integrating their ERP system, SAP, and they were also looking to proven turnaround time. Again, it was a global solution that they were looking for. So that was the scope of the project. So the first step in the process was to define the scope, the resources, budgets, and requirements. An important step was to perform a gap analysis comparing the STARLIMS solution and comparing that against what the users needed at each site. So there was an assessment done for each site to determine what aspects, what components, what functionalities of STARLIMS were needed. In some cases, they were all needed. In some cases, there was a subset of those. But that was a purposeful step that was taken to make sure the sites were getting what they need. As part of validation, of course, that included OQ and PQ, and it was very rigorous at each step of the process. So the implementation was tailored and would define the functions needed, and some of those functions are batch lifecycle workflow, support for integration, and supporting the modules that were defined for each site. As part of defining those details of the STARLIMS configuration, significant design consideration was given to the core build. So what would be the components, what would be the functionalities, what would be the design and the configuration of the system that everyone would use? And importantly, it was necessarily that core design, that core build would fit for all the different sites across the globe. So that was a careful and detailed design approach that was taken. Eventually, we moved on to going to each site, deploying those sites. There was hands-on support at the sites. Our consultants actually went to those sites in Brazil and India and helped with those deployments as they went live. And obviously, we moved on to operational support after that. So it was important that we had a well-defined process which we could execute for each site, get in there with a defined scope, defined configuration, localization, regulatory requirements, and making sure that was done efficiently and effectively, because those teams needed to move on to the next site. So as they rolled off from one site, those systems became live, went over to operational support, and on and repeated in that manner. In addition to going live, we were also responsible for the maintenance support of the application. So we had to plan for those, any updates that were required, either STARLIMS product updates that were necessary, or business requirements that may have changed that required us to make other changes to the system, or just standard maintenance routines. But even those things were very rigorously tested and change control. As you can imagine, this is a regulated industry, in coordination with all the sites and all the internal business units at GSK was required. Of course, communication of all those changes was essential. And then, obviously, transitioning those changes to support, operationalizing all that effort. To sum it up, the combined efforts of GSK, our partners there, the people we work with, there's a core team that we work with, Robert worked with, and of course the STARLIMS product capabilities led to a successful deployment of the defined solution. So we're very pleased to tell you that it was a successful implementation. In addition to that, we also played a role in directing IT to help them with their infrastructure. So not only were we configuring and developing the solution, we're providing guidance to GSK's IT as far as what was needed to support the application infrastructure. Finally, we played multiple roles in this project. We played the architect, designer, configurer, tester, and builder, if you will, for all those technical aspects I mentioned previously. And now I think I'm going to turn over the presentation to Tamara.
Thanks so much, Bob. Oh, sorry.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Not sure what happened there.
Yeah, an extra click. There you go.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Thanks, Bob. All right. Yeah. Perfect. So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to, just for refreshing your memories, I'm going to backtrack to what would have been Bob's slide number 11. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just touch on a few of the points that were in that slide in order to understand and cement the STARLIMS CSols partnership in terms of how we connected, how we worked together to collaborate, and importantly, how this collaboration brought innovation for GlaxoSmithKline, because that's really important. At the end, the client had an objective that they needed to achieve, and we needed to ensure we could deliver on that objective. So the first is to understand that GlaxoSmithKline were looking for a unified workflow. They wanted to look at something that could comprehensively manage all of their integrated laboratory activities. It wasn't just about one specific area, there were multiple areas that needed to be covered. But it wasn't just about looking for a laboratory informatics solution, they were actually looking at the concept of moving beyond digitalization. So this was sort of the first stepping stone towards the total digitalization of their laboratory informatics workflow. Importantly, to support that digitalization was the concept where they needed to actually leverage as much automation as possible. So this is the support for GSK moving from a paperless-based system to essentially a non-paperless based activity regime. It's important to understand that it's not, data informatics is not just about the information that we're putting in. So whilst STARLIMS was obviously an area where they could hold information, it was the concept of the knowledge of what they were going to be able to do with this information that they had collated. So it was the ability to leverage the data analytics. And all of this, while they were digitalizing the lab, while they were looking to automate, while we were looking at analytics and being able to make predictive decisions based on information, we needed to ensure, because of the type of industry we found our client in, that we were maintaining compliance to accreditation and best practices. And so this is kind of a theme that went through the whole project, is that all of these ultimate goals needed to ensure that ultimately we were also achieving the global quality goals of GlaxoSmithKline. And whilst they were doing this, whilst they were looking at putting in the solution that was supporting the digitalization, it was the idea that they had a single unified platform that provided them a LIMS solution, an electronic lab notebook solution, a solution for scientific data management, looking at a solution to support mobility, data analytics, lab execution, and the ability to deploy this across the cloud. Again, moving on to our next slide. Apologies. Sorry, Bob, I'm not sure that the connection has actually worked. Would you just try clicking on your side?
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. All right, perfect. So what were we looking to do in this partnership? So it wasn't just about the connection, the collaboration, or the innovation. We needed to ensure that ultimately we delivered. We delivered on a partnership for a global solution. And maybe a slight backstep at this point, because what we have to understand is that this project was actually the culmination of the convergence of two businesses to form a new co-company. So a new GlaxoSmithKline business division was formed. And so this brought with it its own dynamics. We needed to ensure that GlaxoSmithKline could standardize their manufacturing workflows to ensure that they could harmonize these systems and support this concept of what we call build once, deploy often, and scale. So if you really want to consider it, Bob referred to it as this as a cookie cutter approach, but really it's a bit like a franchise. What you want to ensure is that you're not reinventing the wheel. And what you're doing is you're taking the best practices for this global system that you've developed, and you are seamlessly rolling this out as you scale from one geography to the next. The immediate benefits of this concept of this franchise model for the customer is a lower total cost of deployment, and importantly, this idea where you look at economies of scale. So they get to almost achieve something by the fact that they're actually scaling. They almost are saving as they scale. And in the background for all of this, through the standardization, through the harmonization, is the importance that the customer had an objective to achieve a global quality standard. Moving on to the next slide.
Oops.
So importantly, when we were looking at going global, one of the biggest areas that we had to consider from both a CSols and STARLIMS dynamic in order to support GlaxoSmithKline was how do we support them through this idea of multi-site. And the biggest take home from this is that while we are doing this franchise deployment, so we grow once, we deploy, and then we scale, we do have to consider that individual geographies will have some nuances in that there will be regional specific regulatory items we have to address. There will be regional specific accreditation requirements that have to be addressed. So these will be different. And we needed to ensure that while we were building a build once, we were also considering at the same time how there might be regulatory requirements required as we started to deploy. The importance, of course, of this is also that you need to manage these requirements within this multi-site deployment, which we as a team work together to do so, ensuring that we were still bringing together the harmonization of the operations and of the workflows so that as they were scaling, they could harmonize. And importantly, you'll hear me say this a few times in the next few slides, was this idea that we needed to ensure we had repeatable processes, because repeatable processes provide you the opportunity to scale and to scale efficiently in terms of a time manner. The one thing we needed to consider when we looked at integration, and this was an important aspect specifically for GlaxoSmithKline, was that they were going to have an ERP integration. And STARLIMS needed to support their ERP integration in the context of this deployment was the direct integration between SAP and SAP and STARLIMS. And in this case, it's important to note that as an organization, we actually maintain strategic partnerships with certain providers, and we do so with the big players out there to ensure that when we are working with our customers, they can take cognizance and comfort in understanding that we've managed the strategic partnership to support their entire rollout. So STARLIMS as an organization maintains certifications to certain other business suites. So in this case, we have a certified integration to what we call SAP's Business Suite S/4HANA, and that is their their latest quality management module. And it's not just across SAP as an example, but specifically for the case of GSK, this was something that was important for them to understand. The next item we look at is the concept of supporting automated validation. So being in a regulated industry, in a regulated environment, as alluded to by Bob in one of his slides, and again, as I'm picking up here, is one of the biggest areas in any project like this, when you're working with a company deploying in regulated industries, is the actual validation at the endpoint. So when you're going through the user acceptance testing, we're looking at IQ, PQ, activities. We want to ensure that from the customer's point of view, so for their validation services team and our support thereof, through CSols, through ourselves, that we can provide them the best tools that can make this process as seamless as possible. So what STARLIMS as an organization has done is we've actually taken a specific tool that we as a company use for our own software lifecycle development process, that we put our own product through when we go through automated testing so that we can release next versions to market. We've taken that tool and we've actually embedded the toolkit that allows the automated validation framework using SmartBear directly into our product. So how does this now support the client? What it does is it provides a toolkit that automates the running of test scripts. And to really conceptualize what this means for the client is that, as an example, a specific test case or a test script that might have in the past taken a couple of days to run through manually, because essentially that's the process in many systems that would be required when you're going through computer system validation. We are able to automate that process and reduce it down to a matter of hours. So now when you start to consider the achievement of these global quality standards, you're also looking at the achievements of levels of efficiency, that GSK is actually now able to do certain tasks within the project even quicker than they would have been able to do it historically. Importantly, not only does the tool like SmartBear, the automated validation framework, reduce the time impact of these tasks, but it also removes any human error that might have been involved in test scripts being run manually. And that's really quite, something quite important to take away, is that any human task could potentially introduce errors. So we're adding a tool here that removes that potential risk. The next item that we consider, again, looking at ways where we can support the ultimate product deployment arrangements that we were looking for, is areas where we could make GlaxoSmithKline's ability to interact with the application from a collaboration and sharing point of view even better. So we bring in the idea here of the use of what we call the request management portal. It's an easy to use, really visual task that allows cross-sharing of information between either internal business units or potentially even external business units interacting with the client's information, where they may do so as part of their business process. The next thing that we look at, and this is really important when you start to consider the impacts of data integrity and regulatory compliance. So I bring up these 2 points because it's important to incorporate the use of a laboratory execution system, so we call the STARLIMS LES, at the point where an analyst is actually executing their specific tasks. So you're able to now, again, supporting this concept of moving beyond paperless labs, moving towards digitalization of the full laboratory, and bring in a touch screen device where it's actually optimized for using touch screens at the point where a specific analyst will be using, and it's really easy to adopt by lab personnel, and it allows them to ensure compliance to certain work practices while they are busy working. The next item we start to look at is this concept of actually leveraging automation. So in supporting sort of best practices around regulatory compliance, we also need to look at ways that we can improve traceability, improve data integrity, and improve efficiencies. And the best way to do this is to look at where you can automate and where you can leverage that automation. So STARLIMS has supported GlaxoSmithKline in doing so by looking at the use of our our integrated scientific document management system by looking at the use of integrated REST API library, where we're able to support interoperability and third-party integration to applications to ensure the seamless transfer of information between devices and between applications. Once you start looking, and I mentioned this earlier, once you look at automation, you also start to consider the use of, sorry, Bob, I think oh, there we go. We start to consider the use of analytics. And I say this all the time, this is where I sometimes put on my commercial hat, is that it's really important, obviously, to get information into a system. But honestly, the most important aspect of any informatics solution is actually the value of that data. So once you've got the data, it's being able to turn that data into specific business insights, and it's being able to use those business insights for potentially identifying data integrity problems. So the use of the STARLIMS advanced analytics application allows GlaxoSmithKline to real-time monitor where there could be specific aspects within their data that might highlight where there could be a data integrity problem down the line. So we're looking at the idea of predictive analytics versus reactive analytics. And again, this not only helps to understand data integrity management, but it also looks to support the business objective of increasing turnaround times and working with efficiency gains. The next item I really wanted to raise here is, once we've addressed the specific functional areas where GlaxoSmithKline was actually looking to achieve specific objectives, we start to consider how STARLIMS and CSols worked together to support this concept of an enterprise deployment. And the way that this works is that we actually have the association of two unique competencies. There is what we call the STARLIMS solution expert, where we are sort of the owner of a particular technical solution, but then we work with CSols, who are technical integrators with specific business expertise, and we couple those together with their proven competency for actually implementing STARLIMS across a number of solutions. Again, as pointed out by Bob in one of his slides earlier, we've been partnering for success with our clients since 2007. So, you know, we've had a really long-standing relationship where we have two teams working together in cooperation to bring a really fluid and optimal organization towards a LIMS implementation. And it's really important when you consider, you know, how many moving parts there were in this project, not only within ourselves and within CSols, but also within GlaxoSmithKline, and the seamless way with which our two organizations were able to move together provided a real comfort to GSK that they were receiving the most fluid and the most optimal organization to their project. Again, let's talk about why collaboration is actually beneficial. So it's not only beneficial to ourselves as two organizations to work together, but it's important to understand the benefits that our partnership have actually brought to the client. Because in the end game, both organizations, both CSols and STARLIMS, were working towards a goal where we were ensuring the customers' challenges were met and the customer's original business objectives were realized when the project was ultimately concluded and they were live in all these organizations. So we needed to ensure that we collaborated to clearly understand and jointly define the business objectives, so that once we understood the objectives, we could ensure the outcomes for the project. Again, we revisit the concept of looking towards harmonization, specifically because we were dealing with a new company, the formation of a new organization through the merger of two business units. We needed to ensure a harmonized, validated solution that could be deployed globally, understanding and taking into account all of the various regulatory requirements for each of these geographies. It was also important to ensure consistency. So once again, I bring up that concept of repeatable processes, because consistency across the deployment methodology also had to leverage a collaborative understanding of some of the core and specific site objectives. So while we were deploying this franchise model, there were some instances where we had to be aware of the fact that some of the sites had very site-specific items that also had to be addressed. We needed to ensure we were working against local procedures and regulations, and we were addressing very country-specific needs, not just on the regulatory requirement, but also in terms of how certain procedures had to unfold. And what our collaboration brought was the right level of scope and complexity delivered by this partnership to ensure that there was a foundation that was laid for this franchise model, which enabled GlaxoSmithKline to meet their strategic objectives. And again, it's really important to understand that this best practice was realized because we had this concept of a repeatable process. And why is a repeatable process important, and how does it work to benefit when two organizations collaborate in a partnership? Is that the repeatable processes ensure that you reduce the time to market. So as an organization, while they've got a global quality objective, they also want to make money. And so for GlaxoSmithKline, they needed to ensure that they could reduce the time to market, which increases the time to value. And I think that that's possibly the biggest take home that we can take here, is that the ultimate objective of this project through using repeatable processes was about their increased time to value, which again provided huge benefits to the organization. Before we move to questions, I just wanted to leave one takeaway, and that's that as a solution provider, both STARLIMS and CSols would welcome the opportunity to talk to you about your next steps, to look at whether or not we can run a similar assessment workshop for yourselves, and whether or not we can engage in potential projects for your organization moving forward. So thank you very much for your time. Handing back to yourself, Bob.
Thanks, Tamara. Excellent. I think we'll pause here and take your questions through the chat panel. So I'm going to pause the presentation, and we'll wait for those to come through, trickle through. And Megan, you'll let us know what happens there.
Hi, Bob. Yep. So while we wait for people to send questions through the questions panel, you'll find that on your GoToWebinar panel. I wanted to let everybody know that after this webinar, we will be setting out a follow-up survey. It's about 7 questions. It will take just a couple minutes of your time. It helps us learn a little bit more about you and also how to improve our webinars each month. So if you could take a few minutes and send us back your feedback, that would be fantastic. Okay, so we have some questions coming through. Let's jump in. So the first one I have here says, can you tell me more about the advanced analytics capabilities and the type of business insights they were able to provide to GSK?
I think I'll field, Tamara, I think I'll field the first part of that with respect to the scope of the original project, and then I'll turn it over to you to current capabilities and activities from a GSK perspective.
Perfect.
So during the time frame of this particular project, which was completed in 2019, at that time, GSK had some specific needs with regards to their, analysis of, batches, for example, manufacturing batches. So based on those particular needs, we used the STARLIMS developer tools and the built-in controls that came with those to create a custom module for them, which included graphs and charts, and also providing the option for the users to download data sets, which they could, if they wanted to, import those to stats packages such as Minitab. So in the context of the original project, that was the direction that was provided by GSK. But subsequent to that, I'll defer to you, Tamara, on other activities that may have happened since then.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Bob. So in terms of the application of a tool like advanced analytics towards sort of data analytics per se, I think it's important to make the proviso that any item of information that is stored within the STARLIMS database for GSK, they can actually create a dashboard-like analytics view. So let me give you a few examples. In an organization like GlaxoSmithKline, where they are concerned, for example, with efficiency and with turnarounds, we can create, and we have created, real-time dashboards that allow the end users to be able to track the turnarounds for example, the release of batches. And with it being real-time data, it's also real-time data that can be drilled down. So if they are looking at the turnaround time for the release of a specific production batch, and they set specific delta intervals, let's say they need to see delta that's within 2 hours, within 4 hours, within 6 hours, as examples, they're able to actually drill down to the individual test level for specific items that were tested associated with a specific batch, and able to actually interact with information and make informed decisions by the visuals that they're able to create. So the important take home here is that it really is, you can create a visual dashboard for any item of information existing within their STARLIMS application.
Great.
Thanks, guys. All right, so the next question is, did you use SmartBear to execute formal validation OQ tests, or did these tests, were they made manually? Right.
Again, going back to the context of this project, which ended in 2019, I'll defer to Tamara on when SmartBear was released, but at that time, the validation was handled internally by GSK. Our team there supported their execution, but it was more of a traditional approach to validation at that time.
Okay, so in explaining kind of conceptually, you know, the application of the automated validation framework, it's important to understand, so first to provide that an organization like GlaxoSmithKline and other clients like themselves who work in regulated industries, their goal is always to actually use a product as much as they can out of the box, because it means that they limit the amount of validation that they have to do up front. You accept that if you are using a validation protocol where you do a risk-based assessment, you only validate, for example, high-risk items. And you also never revalidate the product. So you're only looking at areas where you've done specific configuration, and then you're running those validation scripts. So what we do within SmartBear is that the scripts that are provided with the out-of-the-box product are provided for use with SmartBear. Any of those scripts can actually be modified. So if you've made certain modifications with respect to an item that you've done a configuration task, you can modify the original script to include that specific configuration, and then you automate the actual running of that particular script. It is possible to simultaneously do automated validation through the framework where SmartBear runs a script, and in some instances where the client might choose to, they can also manually run some of the scripts. So it's not a all or nothing. You can actually have a combination. But the concept of using SmartBear is that you are able to run the scripts through an automated tool that actually performs the validation on your behalf rather than you manually performing it.
All right, thank you. The next question, given the amount of mergers and acquisitions in the industry, how could the system accommodate a divestiture?
All right, I think I'll take that one, Tamara.
Sure.
In the case of the GlaxoSmithKline project. So early on in the project, prior to 2019, 2007, maybe 17 or 18 or so, there was knowledge that at some point the consumer health and the pharma components of GSK would be separating, and I think staying under the same larger umbrella company, but still that needed to be separated. So given what was done in the initial deployment, those functions occurred within the same company. So that was the same site, in fact, for many sites. They were both CH and pharma. So, but they knew eventually that they had to be separated. So what was done at the time, because that was known that was going to separate, is we were able to segregate the data in the database with a site designation. Now this gets very complicated very quickly, but it gave us a way to readily extract the data from the database for consumer health, and then separate that, pull that, extract it out. So then consumer health could then go forward with their deployment, which is happening today actually in multiple sites. And we're still involved with GSK in those separations, those, if you will, redeployments of functionality, leaving pharma in place and then moving the CH to another STARLIMS system. So that's happening today. But that was something we did with advanced configuration and some customization to accomplish that.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Next question. Can you share about the audit trail within STARLIMS?
Tamara, would you like to take that one?
Sure, absolutely. So the audit trail within STARLIMS, I think it's important to make a comment here that you can switch on a huge amount of auditing, or you can backtrack a little, and this can be controlled within a series of business rules within STARLIMS. But in the concept of an organization like GlaxoSmithKline, who work within a regulated industry and within that space, they can set it up such that almost every keystroke and transaction that happens within STARLIMS can be audited. So every time something is written within the application, an audit trail which is encrypted is created in the background, and that is completely maintained. The ability to visualize the audit trail, so within the actual application, you have this concept of what we call the history button. So at any given point in time, where you're able to access the specific button, so perhaps where you're looking at result entry, or perhaps where you're looking at an approvals process, you can access this concept of the history panel, and it actually brings up a visualization of the actual audit entry. So you're able to recall the specific event. Let's say at a point in time, there was a particular batch that was created, and maybe an investigation was created around that batch. You're able to actually recall that batch. You're able to view it in the history panel, and you're able to see every transaction associated with that, including specific users, specific tasks that they may have performed, instrumentation that may have been used, and the audit trail, as is required for 21 CFR Part 11 compliance, includes the who, the what, the how, and the when. So all of that information is automatically stored in the audit trail.
Megan, this is Bob. Before we go on to our next question, I want to add some clarification on the previous question about divestiture and separating sites. So for those of you familiar with STARLIMS, there is a site definition within STARLIMS today. That's out of the box functionality, capability. You can define what types of functions and features are deployed to a given site. What the need was beyond that for this particular project is that there were eventually going to be separated. That single site was going to be separated. So we needed to put some designator to identify the future separate sites in the database. So I just wanted to clarify that capability of STARLIMS out of the box versus what we did on top of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. I actually have a follow-up question here for Tamara. Is there support offered for the audit trail within the ELN?
Yes, every product within STARLIMS is audit trailed, so including the STARLIMS ELN. It has its own audit trail.
All right. Did you run into any major challenges with the global multi-site implementation, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Okay, I think I'll snag that one time.
Thanks, Bob.
All right. So we definitely did, and however, it wasn't unique to GSK. I would say the deployment challenges. I think for those of us in industry, I've seen these, and it's a practical matter and challenge and struggle to overcome, because when you're deploying a new system to an existing site, they either have an old system or they have paper-based process. So imagine, you're in the lab working through your daily work, and then tomorrow you'll have to transition. So that means careful planning, not only from lab execution perspective, but all the other supporting systems and processes and documentation have to be accounted for as you move into that transition. So that was significant time was spent on that planning with each site to make sure that those pieces and parts were in place and there was adequate time to support the deployment while keeping the lights on. So there was sometimes those happened over weekends, the deployments, to no surprise, but it was that was something that was particularly significant for this project. Thanks,
and
Megan.
I think, Bob, just to add, as a general point of view, actually, I assume to both the GlaxoSmithKline project, but actually to multi-site deployments, so enterprise level deployments globally, is that often the biggest challenge is the change management challenge that are related to people. So what do I mean by this? It's the actual acceptance of the change that they're going to go through. And so the most successful deployments that I have actually been party to have had really good change management procedures in place where they go through almost an embedding of their new systems that they're going to be using, right at the beginning of the project. So rather than it being a top-down solution being given to specific people, they're actually part of the process of actually welcoming and accepting this change. And so I think that in sort of project preparations, companies that put those processes in place really have actually quite seamless projects, and they have less challenges to overcome once they've got an acceptance from their end users per se.
Right. Thank you.
All right. So that looks like the end of our questions. Thank you, everybody, for sending those in. And thank you again for giving us an hour of your time today. If you think of any questions after the webinar, feel free to reply back to the email I send you with a link to the recording, and we can get those questions into the hands of Bob and Tamara to respond back to for you. And so thank you again to Tamara and Bob for the presentation today. We hope to see everybody again at our next webinar.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.